It had been years since the war ended. The protagonist, a man in his early 40s now, had long left the chaos behind. The battlefield, the screams, the smoke, and the blood, all of it felt like a distant memory, like something that belonged to another lifetime. He lived alone in a small house on the edge of a quiet town, a place where nothing reminded him of the horrors he had seen. It was peaceful, far removed from the violent days when he had been a soldier. Every day, he followed a simple routine: wake up, make coffee, and spend the day tending to his garden. There were no more missions, no more enemies to fight, just the hum of normal life. It was a life that, at first, felt strange. But now, years later, it was all he had. He was crouched down, planting some new herbs in his garden when he heard it. A voice, clear, commanding, yet oddly familiar, cut through the quiet of the afternoon. His hands froze mid-motion, the gardening trowel still held in his grip. "You there," the voice called, rich and resonant, with an undeniable strength in its tone. "You, human, I have come for you." For a moment, he thought it was his mind playing tricks on him. After all, no one had visited him for weeks, and the town was miles away. His heart began to race, and his mind raced with confusion. Could it be? But that voice, it couldn't be. He stood slowly, wiping the sweat from his brow, and turned to face the source of the sound. There, standing at the edge of his garden, was a figure unlike anyone he had ever seen before. She was tall, her blue skin shimmering under the sunlight, her eyes glowing a faint, unnatural shade of violet. Her long hair cascaded like waves of silver, and her dress, more like an armor, was intricately designed, reflecting the faint glow of the afternoon sun. His breath caught in his throat. It was her, the alien girl he had saved all those years ago. She was older now, her features sharp and regal, but there was no mistaking her. The memories flooded back: the war, the battlefields, the moment when he had pulled her from the wreckage of a destroyed ship. He had thought about her often, wondering where she had gone, wondering what had happened to the blue-skinned girl who had once depended on him. But now, standing before him, she looked nothing like the frightened survivor he had once protected. She was no longer the helpless girl. She was a figure of power, and she was not here by accident. "You have not forgotten me, have you?" she asked, her voice now laced with something commanding, something he didn't quite understand. The man swallowed hard. He opened his mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. A flood of emotions surged through him: shock, confusion, and even a hint of guilt. He had never expected to see her again. Certainly not like this. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning him as if measuring him for something far more than just an old acquaintance. Then, without warning, she spoke again, her tone colder, more precise. "Kneel." The simple command sent a chill down his spine. He had not expected this. After everything, after all the years, she was ordering him to kneel. And yet, part of him wondered if this was somehow a test of loyalty, of respect. He didn't know. But the words echoed in his mind, and he found himself standing still, caught between the past and the present, between the soldier he once was and the man he had become. What did she want from him now? The man stood frozen, his mind struggling to catch up with reality. The woman before him was no longer the same frightened alien girl he had saved so many years ago. She was taller now, more imposing, her presence commanding attention. The memory of the war, the violence, and the chaos seemed distant now, but the one thing that remained as vivid as ever was the girl he had saved. Her order echoed in his ears: "Kneel." He looked at her, trying to understand why she would ask him to do such a thing. It made no sense. He had once been her protector, her savior. He had pulled her from the wreckage of that burning ship, shielded her from the horrors of that brutal war. Now, after all these years, she had returned to him with an order to kneel. His heart pounded as memories from the war flooded back. He remembered the countless battles, the fear in her eyes when she had first arrived on Earth. He had promised to protect her, to keep her safe. Yet now she was standing before him, a leader, an entirely different person, giving him commands. A part of him didn't know what to do. Was she testing him? Or had things truly changed between them? His hands clenched into fists as he struggled with his emotions. He had always been a man of action, not words. But now, in the face of the alien woman who had once been his companion, he felt uncertain, vulnerable. His pride, his past experiences, fought against the idea of kneeling to anyone, especially to her. She watched him carefully, her gaze unyielding, as if she expected him to comply. He could see the intensity in her eyes, the weight of responsibility that now lay upon her shoulders. She wasn't the same frightened girl he had saved. She had grown stronger, more confident, and he could feel it in the air. The entire atmosphere around them seemed charged with tension. The man took a slow, steadying breath. He looked at her, searching her face for any sign of the girl he had known. But all he saw was a woman, a leader, whose strength had clearly outgrown the fragile creature he had once protected. She was no longer the helpless victim she had once been. She had become someone powerful, someone with the weight of an entire galaxy resting on her shoulders. The silence stretched between them, and the man felt the pressure building. His body still stiffened, resisting the urge to bow before her. But deep down, he knew he had to make a choice. Was this just an order, or was it something more? Slowly, his knees bent. He lowered himself, not because she commanded it, but because he recognized the strength and the importance of the woman before him. There was no escaping the fact that things had changed. Their bond, once formed in the heat of war, had evolved into something more complicated. As he knelt before her, he realized that it wasn't just about respect. It was about understanding. The blue-skinned alien girl he had saved so long ago had returned to something far more than a survivor. She had become a leader, a force in her own right, and he had to accept that. She said nothing, but he could feel the weight of her gaze as she studied him. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. "Good," she finally said, her voice softening, but there was still a sharpness to it. "You understand." The moment he knelt, memories surged back, uninvited but impossible to ignore. The peaceful garden, the quiet of the afternoon, vanished. Instead, the sounds of war echoed in his mind. The cries of soldiers, the roar of explosions, and the sharp clanking of metal on metal. The memories were as vivid as the day they had happened, and for a moment, he was transported back to that battlefield. It had been years ago, during the most brutal conflict his planet had ever seen. Earth had been caught in the crossfire of a galactic war, and humans, unprepared and untrained for such chaos, found themselves struggling to survive. The protagonist had been a young soldier then, fresh out of boot camp, his hands shaky as he gripped his weapon. He had never imagined he would be thrust into such a conflict. The blue-skinned girl had appeared out of nowhere, caught in the middle of the battle. A ship from her people had crashed nearby, and in the wreckage he had found her. She was a child back then, frightened, wounded, and barely conscious. Without thinking, he had dragged her from the burning wreckage, his heart pounding in his chest. The battle had raged on around them, but all he cared about was getting her to safety. In those first few moments, she had been helpless. She couldn't speak, couldn't even move. She had looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes, and in that moment, he had promised to protect her. He had no idea who she was, where she came from, or what significance she held. All he knew was that she needed help, and he had to give it. The man remembered the long nights spent hiding in bunkers, the sound of enemy ships flying overhead. In the midst of it all, the girl had started to recover. She would watch him with those large, purple eyes, and over time, they had built a silent bond. They communicated without words, learning to trust each other in the chaos. He had become her protector, and she had become his reminder of the humanity they were fighting to save. But as the war dragged on, he had begun to realize that the girl wasn't just any survivor. She was from a powerful alien race, one that had been caught in the crossfire of the war between galactic factions. She wasn't just an innocent bystander. She was important. Her people, her entire race, had been at war with the very forces that sought to destroy Earth. He had protected her, but she had always carried a secret, one that he didn't fully understand at the time. The war had ended, and he had never seen her again until now. As the man knelt before her, the memories continued to flood his mind. He remembered her gentle smile, the way she had thanked him silently after they escaped each battle. He remembered how, in the midst of the horrors, she had become a symbol of hope for him. She had been his reason to keep going, his reason to believe that something good could come from all the destruction. But now, all these years later, she was different. The girl he had saved had become a leader, a warrior. The girl he had once protected was now commanding him. The weight of it all felt heavy, but he didn't resist. He understood that the war had changed both of them. As the flashbacks faded, the reality of the present returned. The woman before him was not the frightened alien child he had saved. She was someone else entirely, someone he could no longer predict. The alien woman stood before him, her presence undeniable. The once fragile girl he had rescued from the flames had transformed into a powerful leader. He could see it in the way she carried herself now, strong, poised, and commanding. The past seemed distant, but standing before her, the memories of the war resurfaced sharply. The man took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. He had never expected this. He had saved her out of instinct, driven by a need to protect. He never knew who she truly was, never understood the weight of what he had done. But now, it was clear. She was not just any alien. She was someone of great importance. She had been one of the few survivors of a race that had been embroiled in a brutal war for years. The man had learned bits and pieces of her people's history during the time he spent with her in the war. They were a proud ancient civilization, locked in a deadly conflict with another powerful faction in the galaxy. It was a war they had lost, but the price of defeat had been higher than anyone could imagine. "You have no idea what you did, do you?" she said, her voice steady, almost distant. "Saving me wasn't just an act of kindness. It changed everything. Your actions on that battlefield brought us something we had lost: hope." The man swallowed hard, trying to process her words. Hope. He never thought of it that way. To him, it had been nothing more than an instinct to save a life. But he could see now that his actions had far-reaching consequences. By saving her, he had saved more than just a life. He had unknowingly altered the course of the war for her people. The alien woman paused, her gaze softening for a moment as if considering how much to share. "I wasn't just any survivor," she continued, her voice quiet but firm. "I was the daughter of a leader, a symbol for my people. I was meant to be a beacon of hope, but the war shattered everything. When you pulled me from that wreckage, you didn't just save a life, you saved the future of my people." The man's mind raced. He remembered her fragile state after the crash, her fear and confusion as she was thrust into a world she didn't understand. He remembered how they had communicated in broken words, how she had clung to him for comfort in the chaos. He had never known she held such significance. Her people had been on the brink of annihilation, and he had never realized the full weight of what he had done. He had simply thought she was another victim, another life to protect in a war that had no clear sides. But now, she was standing before him, no longer a helpless girl, but a powerful leader, one who had survived against impossible odds. She continued, her voice now stronger. "I was meant to lead, but I couldn't do it alone. I needed you. I needed someone like you to help guide me, to help my people rise again." The man's chest tightened. She was asking him for help again, but it wasn't the same. He wasn't the young soldier he had been back then. He was older, worn by the years, by the weight of the wars he had fought. Yet, as she looked at him with those violet eyes, he felt something stir inside him. A familiar sense of duty, a desire to protect. "I don't know if I can help you the way I did before," he said quietly, his voice rough. I'm not the same person. The war is over, and I've left all that behind." She stepped closer, her eyes not leaving his. "You don't need to be the same person. You just need to remember who you are. I need you. My people need you." The weight of her words settled over him, and for the first time since her return, he felt a flicker of the soldier he once was. The war might have ended, but the battle for something greater was still ahead. And as much as he wanted to refuse, as much as he wanted to stay hidden in his quiet life, something deep inside him knew he couldn't ignore her. He couldn't ignore them. The man remained kneeling before her, still struggling to understand the weight of the situation. His mind raced, but his body stayed frozen, as if caught in some deep, unspoken moment. The alien woman, now standing tall in front of him, watched him intently. Her eyes were no longer filled with fear or uncertainty. They were focused, determined, the gaze of a leader. He had never expected to kneel to anyone. Certainly not to her. He had saved her life, taken on the impossible task of shielding her from the horrors of a war that had seemed endless. Back then, they had shared a bond, one forged in the midst of chaos and bloodshed. But now, decades later, he had been commanded to kneel before her, the same girl who had once been at his mercy. But he didn't know what to think anymore. Things had changed. The girl he had once protected had become someone far different. She wasn't just another survivor anymore. She was powerful, influential, and somehow he could see she was more than he had ever imagined. And so, here he was, kneeling in front of her, not out of fear, but out of respect. A respect that slowly began to grow in his chest. "Good," she said softly. Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of pride in it. "You understand." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For a brief moment, the man didn't know whether he should stand up or remain on his knees. His heart still beat fast, the emotions within him unsettled. There was a part of him that wanted to push this all away, to tell her that he wasn't the same person who had saved her life. But deep down, he knew he had to accept the reality of who she had become. She wasn't the same girl anymore. And neither was he. "Why did you order me to kneel?" he finally asked, his voice low, still processing the confusion in his mind. "After all these years, why?" She tilted her head slightly, as though considering the question carefully. Then she stepped forward, her gaze softening as she looked down at him. "It's not just a gesture of power," she said slowly. "It's a gesture of respect. When I was weak, you protected me. You saved me. And now, when I need you again, I need to know that the man who stood beside me then will stand beside me again. This kneel, it is not for me, but for what you did for me." The words were simple, but they cut through him like a blade. The respect she spoke of wasn't just about her commanding him. It was about the bond they had shared, the bond that had carried them both through the worst of the war. She wasn't just demanding obedience. She was acknowledging that their paths had crossed once again, not as master and servant, but as equals, both shaped by the past. The man slowly stood, meeting her gaze with a newfound understanding. His chest tightened, a mix of emotions flooding through him. The girl he had saved all those years ago had returned, not just as a reminder of the past, but as someone who needed him. And for the first time in years, he felt a spark of purpose deep inside him. It was a call to arms, but not just for her people. It was a call to fight for something greater than himself. "I'm ready," he said quietly, the weight of his decision settling into his bones. "What do we do now?" The alien woman's lips curved slightly, a subtle but approving smile. "We prepare for war," she said, "but this time, we fight together." And just like that, he knew. The kneel had changed everything. But it wasn't about the past. It was about the future they would build together. The man stood up straight, a sense of purpose now settling in his chest. The woman before him, the blue-skinned alien who had once been his responsibility, now had him on a new path. A path he didn't fully understand yet, but one he knew he had no choice but to follow. She wasn't just asking for his help. She was depending on him. "The war is not over," she said, her voice steady, the gravity of her words clear. "My people are still fighting. But this time, we face a far greater enemy." He listened, his thoughts racing. The quiet life he had built for himself, working in his garden, living in peace, was slipping away, replaced by something he had tried to forget. He had put the war behind him, but now it was impossible to escape. His skills, his knowledge from those dark days, were being called upon again. He looked at her, noticing the faint scars on her skin, the weariness in her eyes. She was no longer the frightened girl he had once saved. She was a leader, carrying the weight of her people's survival on her shoulders. The years had changed her, but in some ways, she was still the same. She was asking him for help once more. "What enemy?" he asked, his voice low, trying to keep his emotions in check. "What's going on?" The alien woman's gaze hardened. She stepped forward, the sharp edge of authority in her every movement. "We are fighting a galactic war, but not against the same forces as before. This time, it's an alliance of factions, each with their own motives. They seek to crush us, to wipe us out, and they've joined forces with the most powerful empire in the galaxy." His heart sank as she spoke. He had seen the destruction war could bring. The lives lost, the worlds torn apart. He had thought that kind of violence was behind him, but it seemed like the universe had other plans. "They want to eliminate us because we are a symbol of defiance," she continued. "They believe we pose a threat to their rule. My people, the ones you saved, are the last remaining resistance. Without us, they will control the galaxy. They know it, and they're willing to do anything to make sure we are wiped out." The man felt his chest tighten. He had never wanted this, never asked for it, but he knew he couldn't turn his back on her people. He had promised once, long ago, to protect her, and even though the years had passed, the promise still weighed on him. He had been part of this war once, but he hadn't realized just how much it had changed. "Why me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you need me again?" The alien woman stepped closer, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "Because you know how to fight. Because you understand tactics. Because, despite everything, you've always been my protector. You were the first person to give me hope when everything seemed lost. I need that hope again." Her words hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't just about the war. It was about trust, about the bond they had formed long ago. He had never thought of himself as a hero. He had only done what was necessary. But to her people, he was more than just a soldier. He was a symbol of their strength. The weight of her plea settled on him. The choice was clear. He could walk away, continue his quiet life, and pretend nothing had changed. But he knew deep down that he couldn't. He had fought once for a cause bigger than himself, and now he had the chance to do so again. "I'll help," he said, his voice firm now, the decision made. "What do we need to do?" She smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her since her arrival. "We prepare for war, together." And just like that, his old life was gone. The fight, the struggle, the purpose, everything he had left behind was now back in his hands. The war wasn't over, it was just beginning. The decision had been made. The man had agreed to help the alien woman and her people once more, but as they began to prepare for the war that was rapidly approaching, something inside him began to shift. The past few days had been filled with strategy meetings, weapon checks, and tactical discussions, but beneath the surface, there was tension, an unspoken divide that neither of them seemed willing to address. He had fought for so long, had seen so many battles, and yet this time, it felt different. This wasn't just about protecting a planet or saving a people. This was about the alien woman, the girl he had saved so many years ago. And while he had agreed to help her, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. She had become a leader, a strong and capable one, but in doing so, she had grown distant. The connection they once shared, the bond formed in the heat of battle, seemed to have faded into the background. It was as if she had put on a mask, one that made her appear untouchable, unreachable. She gave orders, made decisions without hesitation, and carried the weight of her people's survival on her shoulders. But to him, it felt like she was no longer the person he had once protected. Late one evening, after a long day of planning, the man found himself alone in his small quarters, staring out the window. The stars outside seemed distant, like everything in his life had become. He had never expected to return to this life, and yet here he was, standing on the edge of another war, fighting for a woman who no longer seemed to need him. He heard the door open behind him, and without turning around, he knew who it was. He could sense her presence even before she spoke. "You're troubled," the alien woman's voice said, softer than usual. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer immediately, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Finally, he turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You've changed," he said simply, the words tasting heavier than he had expected. "You're no longer the girl I saved. You're a leader, and I don't know where I fit into all of this." She stood silently for a moment, her violet eyes searching his face as if trying to understand. Then, with a deep breath, she stepped forward, her posture still strong, but there was a subtle vulnerability in her expression that he hadn't seen before. "I never asked you to fit in," she said, her voice quiet. "I asked you to help, to fight for something bigger than yourself. But I see now that you don't just want to be a soldier. You want to be something more. And I don't know how to give you that, because I don't even know how to give it to myself." His heart tightened at her words. There was a part of him that wanted to reach out to her, to remind her of the bond they had once shared, but the other part of him felt like an outsider, someone who no longer belonged in her world. The war had changed them both, and it wasn't just the galaxy that was torn apart. It was their connection. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," he said, his voice softer now. "I'm not the person I was, and you're not the person I saved." The silence between them grew heavy, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. But in the quiet, the alien woman's gaze softened, and she reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of command, but of understanding. "I haven't forgotten who you are," she said, "and I haven't forgotten what you did for me. But we're both changed. The war changed me. It changed you. But we can still fight together, even if it's different this time." His heart gave a faint flutter, and for the first time in days, he felt something stir within him. Maybe she was right. Maybe they were both different. But that didn't mean they couldn't fight side by side once more. "I don't know if we'll ever be the same," he said, looking into her eyes, "but I'll stand by you. I always will." She smiled, a small but genuine smile. And in that moment, despite the distance between them, despite the changes that had come, he felt a flicker of the connection they once shared. Maybe it wasn't the same as before, but it was something, and that was enough. The next few days passed in a blur. The preparation for the war was overwhelming, with each day bringing more challenges. The man had spent years in peace, working on his garden, living a quiet life, but now he was once again thrust into the heart of something bigger than himself. As the alien woman's people gathered in the war camp, the stakes grew higher with each passing hour. Every decision they made would determine the fate of her entire race, and perhaps the galaxy itself. The man had been in countless battles before, but this time something felt different. The memories of the past, the death, the fear, the endless fights, haunted him more than ever. He couldn't shake the feeling that, no matter how hard he tried, the war would never leave him. It wasn't just about the alien woman anymore. It was about a chance to prove to himself that he still had purpose. And yet, as he watched the alien woman lead her people, he felt conflicted. She was strong, fierce, and unwavering in her decisions. She didn't seem to need him anymore. She had grown into a leader in a way he could never have imagined. It was clear now. She had changed, and so had he. The bond they once shared, forged in the fire of battle, seemed like a distant memory. But the truth was undeniable. She had returned, and with her, the chance to fight once more, to fight for something larger than himself. He found himself standing alone, watching the stars above the war camp, deep in thought. The cold night air brushed against his face, but it did little to clear the fog in his mind. Should he go back to his quiet life? Should he leave all this behind and forget the war ever existed? Or was there still something left in him that could make a difference? As if on cue, the alien woman appeared beside him, her footsteps light but confident. He didn't turn to face her right away, but he could feel her presence, strong, just like the first time they had met on the battlefield. She was a symbol of hope for her people, and in many ways, she had become his symbol too. The man had never truly understood the weight of what he had done when he saved her. Now he was starting to see that it wasn't just her life he had saved. It was the future of an entire race. "You're quiet tonight," she said softly, her tone gentle but steady. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" He turned slowly, meeting her gaze. "Thinking about what?" "About fighting again," she replied, her eyes searching his face. "About whether you should stay or leave." He didn't answer right away, but the silence between them said more than words ever could. He had thought about leaving. It would be easier, he told himself. He could go back to his life, return to the quiet world he had built. But deep down, he knew that wasn't who he was anymore. The war had shaped him, just as it had shaped her. There was no going back. "I'm not the same as I was," he said quietly, his voice heavy with truth. "I don't know if I can still do this." She stepped closer, her expression softer now. "I'm not the same either, but we don't have to be who we were. We have to be who we are now. Together." Her words, simple but powerful, broke through the fog in his mind. He had spent so long fighting the past, trying to escape it, but now he realized that the past was part of him, and it wasn't about forgetting. It was about accepting it and using it to move forward. The man took a deep breath, looking out at the stars. He had spent so much of his life running from the war, but the truth was, the war had never truly left him. And now, standing beside her, he knew there was only one choice left to make. "I'm with you," he said, his voice steady. "I'll fight. For you. For them. For all of us." The alien woman smiled, the weight of the decision not lost on her. "Then let's make sure we win this war," she said softly. And in that moment, he knew that no matter what happened, they would face it together, no longer as a protector and a survivor, but as equals, standing side by side. The days leading up to the battle were filled with preparation. The camp buzzed with activity as soldiers, both alien and human, worked tirelessly to get ready for what lay ahead. The air was thick with tension, and every conversation seemed to be about the war, the enemy, the strategy, the chances of success. The man had never been part of a fight like this. He had fought wars before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about fighting for a cause, for a future, and for a woman he had once saved and who now depended on him once again. He spent most of his time training the troops. The alien soldiers were strong, but they lacked the experience he had gained over the years. They were used to fighting with technology and brute force, but the man knew that strategy, precision, and teamwork were just as important. He worked with them, showing them how to move in formation, how to strike when the moment was right, how to anticipate the enemy's next move. He could feel the respect they had for him growing, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was doing something meaningful. The alien woman watched him from afar, her eyes never far from the action. She was busy organizing her commanders, making plans and giving orders, but she always found a moment to check in on him. Sometimes, when they would exchange a look, he would catch a glimpse of the girl he had saved all those years ago. The bond they had once shared was still there, though different now. She had become a leader, a symbol of hope, and he had become her trusted ally. But even as they worked together, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. They weren't the same people. One evening, After another long day of training and preparing, the man found himself alone in his tent, reviewing the battle plans. The maps were spread out before him, marked with the positions of enemy forces, their supply lines, and their potential weaknesses. But despite the detailed planning, something weighed on him. The battle was only the beginning. He knew that whatever happened, it would change everything. It wasn't just about the alien girl anymore. It was about his own place in this war. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. The alien woman stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. She was always direct, always decisive, and today was no different. "We leave at dawn," she said, her voice steady, but tinged with an undercurrent of urgency. "The enemy won't wait, and neither can we. Are you ready?" The question hung in the air between them. He had been ready before, back when he was younger and everything had been black and white. But now, it wasn't so simple. He wasn't the same man who had charged into battle years ago. He had changed. The world had changed. And yet, here he was, ready to fight again. He looked at her, meeting her eyes for the first time in days. There was no longer any uncertainty. He had made his decision. And now, it was time to act. "I'm ready," he said, his voice clear. "We fight tomorrow. For you. For us." She smiled, and for a brief moment, he saw the girl he had once saved, not just the leader she had become. "Then we fight together," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "We will win." As she left the tent, the man sat for a moment, his mind heavy with thoughts of the upcoming battle. The weight of his decision still pressed on him, but now he felt a strange calm. No matter the outcome, he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer fighting for just himself. He was fighting for a cause, for a future, and for the woman who had once been his responsibility and now stood beside him as an equal. Tomorrow, the battle would begin, and no matter what, they would face it together. The morning of the battle arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. The camp was alive with movement, soldiers preparing their weapons, checking their armor, and running through last-minute drills. The man could hear the sounds of clanging metal and the low murmur of voices, but his mind was focused on one thing: the fight ahead. The peace he had once known seemed like a distant memory, a life long gone. Now all that mattered was the war, and he was ready for it. He stood by the edge of the camp, looking out at the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break. He had fought in wars before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about surviving. It was about making sure that the galaxy, the people he had come to care for, had a future. His hands gripped the hilt of his weapon, the weight of it familiar but somehow heavier today. He had never asked for this. He never imagined his life would lead him back to war. But here he was, ready to face whatever came his way. The alien woman approached him quietly, her footsteps soft but confident. She wore her battle armor now, her blue skin gleaming under the early morning light. Her eyes were sharp, focused, but there was a hint of something else in them, a flicker of the girl he had saved all those years ago. It was a reminder of what had brought them together, and a promise of what they could still accomplish. "We're ready," she said, her voice steady, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. "The enemy is close. We fight today, and we fight for everything." He nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. It wasn't just a battle for survival, it was a battle for freedom, for hope. The future of her people, and maybe even the future of the galaxy, rested on their shoulders. "We'll win," he said, more to himself than to her. But as the words left his mouth, he realized he truly believed them. He had no idea what the outcome would be, but he knew one thing for certain: they had come too far to turn back now. Together, they walked toward the front lines, the soldiers parting to make way for them. The man felt the eyes of the troops on him, a mix of respect and trust. They had trained hard, and they had faith in their leaders. The alien woman had earned their loyalty, but it was his presence that gave them something else, a sense of humanity, of shared experience. As they reached the front, the man took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the battlefield ahead. The enemy forces were already in position, a dark mass against the morning sky. Their ships hovered above, ominous and silent. The air crackled with tension, the calm before the storm. The alien woman turned to him, her expression resolute. "This is it. Stay close, and don't let anything distract you." He nodded, and together, they took their places. The battle horns sounded, and the first wave of enemy soldiers began to move forward. The clash of weapons, the screams of combat, and the roar of engines filled the air. It was chaos, but in the middle of it all, the man felt a sense of clarity. This was where he belonged. This was where his skills, his training, and his resolve would make a difference. The fight raged on, and though the odds were against them, they fought with everything they had. The alien woman led her forces with unmatched precision, her commands clear and decisive. The man fought beside her, a trusted ally in the chaos. They were no longer just two people caught in a war. They were a force, united by purpose and by the bond they had shared. As the sun climbed higher, the enemy forces began to retreat. The battle, though fierce, was turning in their favor. The alien woman stood beside him, her face streaked with sweat and dirt, but her eyes still burning with determination. "We've done it," she said, her voice hoarse but full of triumph. "We've won." The man looked around at the battlefield, the scattered bodies of the enemy, and the victorious faces of their soldiers. It had been a hard fight, but they had succeeded. The war wasn't over, but this battle had been their turning point. As he stood beside the alien woman, looking out over the battlefield they had just won, he realized something. The bond they shared had never truly been about saving someone. It had been about standing together, no matter the cost, and fighting for a future. And now, that future was a little bit brighter. Together, they had changed the course of history.